everyone, it's Miss Sinclair
and Miss Shannon.
We have a review video for you on completing the square today.
Okay, so if we take a look at the steps for completing the square, we're going to just do one kind of easier example just to get started. So part one is asking you to always take a look at your leading coefficient and make sure that it is equal to 1. And if it's not, then we have to divide each term by that. So as we start here, we can see that x squared just has a coefficient of 1, so we don't have to worry about step 1. Step 2 is where we have to move our constant term to the right-hand side. So I'm going to add over my 4, and I'm left with x squared plus 8x. And as I start doing this step, I'm also taking a look at step 3, which tells me to prepare to add that needed value. So I'm going to just leave myself a blank space on either side of my equation. So now I took care of steps 2 and 3. Step 4 says to find that needed value. So by finding the needed value, we need to take a look at our b value, which is 8. And we're going to take 8, we're going to divide it by 2, and we're going to square it. So I end up with 4 squared, which gives me a value of positive 16. So that 16 now is going to be added to either side of my equation. Then we go on to step 5, which is asking us to factor the perfect square trinomial. So that is my x squared plus 8x plus 16. So I'm going to factor that, which means I need to be thinking about what multiplies to 16 while also adding to 8. So that would be positive 4 and positive 4. And at this time, I can also add up my constants on the right, and I get positive 20. Once I factor that, we're also going to now rewrite the factors as a squared binomial. So just simplify this as x plus 4 squared is equal to positive 20. Okay, now we need to take the square root of both sides of our equation. And just remember that when we insert a square root to solve an equation, you always need to remember your plus or minus. So by square rooting a squared term, you're going to just be left with the term, so x plus 4, and that's going to be equal to plus or minus the square root of 20. Now, I also want to make sure that I'm simplifying my radical. So what I'm asking myself now is, what are the factors of 20, 1 being a perfect square factor? So factors of 20 that I'm going to be using here are 4 times 5, 4 being our perfect square of the factors. So I'm going to separate this radical into the square root of 4 times the square root of 5, and the 4 is going to come out as a 2. So I'm left with x plus 4 is equal to plus or minus 2 rad 5, and now all I need to do is solve for x by subtracting the 4 on either side. And we get x is equal to negative 4 plus or minus 2 square root of 5.
Okay, so let's take a look at a practice region question. It says, Brian correctly used the method of completing the square to solve the equation x squared plus 7x minus 11 equals 0. His first step was to rewrite the equation. So he rewrote it as x squared plus 7x. I'm going to leave our little space here. Equals 11. He then added a number to both sides. What number did he add? Well, we know to figure out what goes in this space, we need to take our b value, take half of it, so half of 7, and square it. So 7 over 2 squared becomes 49 over 4. So that would be the number that he would need to add in this spot. That is choice 2.
Okay, for number 2, we're being given the quadratic x squared plus 2 is equal to 6x. And we're being asked for an intermediate step along the way in completing the square process. So right now I'm not in the right form. I need my constant to be on the right and everything else to be on the left. So I'm going to have to subtract my 2 on either side and subtract my 6x on either side of this equation. So I get x squared minus 6x. I'm going to also leave myself that space on either side as I prepare for that needed value. Again, that value comes from taking a look at your b value. You're going to divide it by 2 and square it. So I get negative 3 squared, which is equal to a positive 9. So that positive 9 is going to go on either side of my equation. Now my perfect square trinomial needs to be factored, and I'm asking myself what multiplies to positive 9 and adds to negative 6, and that would be negative 3 and negative 3, and it's equal to a positive 7. We'll just rewrite this in simpler form. X minus 3 squared equal to 7, and this comes out to be choice 2.
Okay, our last problem asks us to solve 2x squared minus 12x plus 4 equals 0 by completing the square. Okay, we remember when we complete the square, the coefficient in front of the x squared needs to be a 1. In this case, it's not. It's a 2. So I need to divide everything by 2. Everything here by 2. So now I'm left with x squared minus 6x plus 2 equals crossed it over. Remember, we like to leave ourselves that space. Now I'm going to take half of my b value. I'm going to take negative 6 divided by 2 and square it. So I get negative 3 squared, which is 9. Let's add this positive 9 to both sides. Now let's factor this left part. So I get x minus 3 times x minus 3 equals negative 2 plus 9 is 7. You can rewrite this as x minus 3 squared equals 7. Now our next step is to take the square root of both sides. Remember, whenever we write in our own square root, we need to remember the plus or minus. From the left, I'm just left with x minus 3. On the right equals plus or minus radical 7. The very last step is just to solve for x. So let's add 3 to both sides. X equals 3 plus or minus radical 7. Final answer.